Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about marketing technically complex products and services, and some of the challenges and opportunities they present. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jaxon Repp, Field CTO and Head of Marketing at HarperDB. Jaxon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this with you. Why don't we get started with you giving a little background on yourself, as well as what you're currently doing in your role at HarperDB?
Absolutely. I am currently the field CTO for HarperDB, but I am a partially reformed developer who has, sort of expanded beyond writing code all day and focused on product primarily because I used to work, in a field where often the requirements were on a napkin from the CEO and you had to figure it out and you had to make it work. And really, when I work with cool products, which is what HarperDB is, when I found them, there were really simple choices that I saw that we could make to bring this to market in a way that was more appealing than just being a database. I saw a bigger opportunity to position us to solve, a lot more customer angst than just customer requirements. And really that's what I do all day is I work with customers. I talk about their needs. I talk about what our platform does. And then I try to influence the product part of the organization to kind of come up with a solution that still stays true to our vision, but ultimately is going to deliver value for customers and obviously make money for the company.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, let's dive into this then. So, we're here to talk about how you market complex products and services, what to do, as well as, maybe a few things to avoid as well. So to kind of help and frame this discussion, can you explain a little bit about, what does HarperDB do and who are your customers?
Sure. HarperDB is a distributed application platform. We do have DB in the name because that's where we started out. But we were a distributed database, which means you can have instances of HarperDB all over the planet close to where your users are so that it doesn't take so much time to look a record up and return it. So just as a database, we wanted to be close to users to lower latency. And then we found ourselves, wondering if people's applications that use the data, where are those running and how close can we get to eliminate latency? And eventually we realized the closest thing we could do is just build an application server directly on top of our database so that we could simplify, architecture of these distributed systems because they are inherently complex. A modern application may have upwards of 100 moving parts, which is fine. And we do that every day. But if I wanted to be in 100 locations, I now have to worry about the health of 10,000 moving parts. So we wanted to create a solution for distributed computing that delivered benefits beyond just latency because the complexity and total cost of ownership was one of those things we saw growing exponentially, as people tried to put their applications and their data in more places. And just to talk a little bit about our customers fall into two distinct groups. They are application developers who are focused on performance and speed and scalability, but then also giant network providers that have a vested interest in making their customers' applications run as fast as possible. So we work with a large number of massive network providers. Akamai is one of them, the largest CDN in the world. They professionally are the best company in the world at making assets arrive quickly, static assets. And we like to say we're effectively a CDN for applications and their data. And that really resonates, with large network providers who just by moving data closer to the edge can make their own networks look, 1,000 times faster.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely, the CDN analogy helps me understand that a little bit better too. So I appreciate that. So HarperDB uses the phrase "collapse the stack" to describe how you've combined several typically standalone technologies, so databases, application platforms, streaming, message queue, into a single product. There's a lot of talk about headless, composable microservice, all of those kinds of things these days. So how do customers react to a more monolithic solution to some of these things in a world where everything seems to be a microservice, module, component, etc. these days?
It's a really good question, and one that we kind of picked up our banner and built a truly integrated application platform and went into the market. And we're absolutely ready for everybody to tell us, but I like my micro front ends. I like running 100 containers for my UI so I can swap them out easily. Absolutely. I thought that's where all the conversations were going. But at the end of the day, what we realized was latency, translates directly to cost, not just the lost cost of a user coming in and thinking it's pretty slow for your API server to travel, halfway across the continent to get some data from a database and then return it to the API and then maybe to the user who, might be on a different, in a different country. So that lack of proximity bred a great deal of latency. And if I could cut latency in half, i.e., it takes me 10 milliseconds to return you a result instead of 20 milliseconds, that doesn't seem like a lot. It's only 10 milliseconds that you're saving. But what we were absolutely shocked to realize is that it was a very easy story to tell that if I can answer the question twice as fast, I can answer twice as many questions on the same piece of hardware. So if I can cut your latency by 50%, I can cut your cost by 50%. And the way I do that is by putting the API layer directly on top of the data and by having that whole shebang sit in a bunch of places very close to your users. So you can tell a story of latency and you can tell a story of simplicity and integration and fewer moving parts. And it resonates with a lot of the people who, are in IT operations, right? They see fewer things to maintain, fewer licenses to maintain, and they get it. But where it really lands is when you explain to the C-suite that you can do exactly the same amount of work and spend half as much on the hardware, because that tends to be the problem we solve more than anything is a legacy system that has been band-aided, 7 ways from Sunday to try to achieve the scale necessary. And they have just thrown money at it typically to keep the latency and the performance in an acceptable range at that scale. And nobody wants to rip or replace anything because that's a multi-year effort. And so being a layer that can help them move to the edge, deliver that performance, tends to outweigh all the concerns of engineers. But we've also done a lot of developer-friendly stuff. We like to say we have the best developer experience in the world because we know that lots of people are used to working with their particular stacks. We know that they are very protective of those. And we know that they are obviously the people that if we sell into the C-suite can turn around and absolutely say, no, I don't want to do it. It's going to take years. And we don't want that story to be, the result of, a sales effort. So we go in and we do a lot of developer advocacy and we help them understand that there's fewer moving parts, which gives them more time in the day to do like fun stuff, like perhaps not chase trouble, on the interconnects between your 100 micro front end containers.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like some of the promotion of the product and just getting it out there is the developer evangelism, as you just mentioned. I would imagine there's a lot of other marketing components as well. And being that this is something that is, it's both technically complex and it is in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways contrary to some of the, that composable and microservice stuff that's out there. So in other words, some of the people that are seeing your marketing and marketing materials are perhaps they're seeing mixed messages depending on who they talk to or whatever. So all that to say, marketing a technically complex product is challenging, right? It probably goes without saying, but say it anyway. So, what early assumptions paid off when working with HarperDB to really get the message and the value out there?
One of the things that they did, I was working at a different company at an IoT low-code platform, and I was looking for a database that I could hook into to persist data that was streaming around this IoT system. And I found HarperDB primarily because they were distributed, so they could be in lots of places, which meant they could be very, very close to the sensors from which I was collecting data. But more than anything, they had a built-in HTTP API. So rather than hassling with, a driver or, a connector of some sort that was proprietary and hook in, I could just use a regular HTTP request like every other app in the world.
Yeah.
And it just seemed really easy for me to get up to speed and interact with it. Even, probably the most popular open source database in the world, MongoDB, you still have, a backend and drivers and there's the typical database complexity. And that simple story, just building in one feature, was enough for me to see that this company was fundamentally different. And there's a few others, like indexing every attribute by default so that it's always performant. There's a trade there, a little more space on disk, but guaranteeing performance for developers who maybe are building something out, as a prototype. And then inevitably, if it goes well, everybody in management wants it to go to production as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of things you did to make that thing work that aren't necessarily optimized. And we wanted the data to not necessarily be yet another one of those things you had to optimize. So a lot of forward-looking, decisions and assumptions that we made on behalf of developers, primarily because we are developers and we know that these are pain points that we go through. So we've always been very good at focusing on the developer experience, and that's probably paid off more than anything else.
Before we continue, I wanted to share a key strategic resource that a majority of the Fortune 500 are already aware of. Finding the best technology, business, and talent solutions is not easy. With business demands and competitive pressures mounting, you need to be able to design, deploy, and optimize your technology to provide leading customer experiences while driving business growth. Those of you that have been listening to this show for a while know that this podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, a global provider of technology, business, and talent solutions for more than 80% of the Fortune 500. TEKsystems accelerates business transformation for their customers. Whether you're looking to maximize your technology ROI, drive business growth, or elevate customer experiences, TEKsystems enables enterprises to capitalize on change. Learn more at teksystems.com. That's TEK systems.com. Now let's get back to the show. So when marketing and developing a product, some things work really well. There's always those things that maybe don't work as well as one might have anticipated. Can you talk about something that maybe didn't work as well as you thought it might have at first, and how did you adjust to that?
Absolutely. With our focus on developer experience and having developers tell us they loved us, we went initially for a strategy of big corporate sales. We're going to reach out to big enterprises, and then we were also going to reach out to developers at their level on developer boards and sponsor projects and hire influencer developers to build our products and hopefully get this army of people who love our product and then would take that product into their day job, and when a new opportunity sprung up, would say, oh, I've been working with this new platform. It's super easy to use. It's super fast. It scales really well. And we wanted them to become our advocates in their organizations to push things up. And the developer pull through is what that's called. And it has not paid off at 3 companies in a row now. And I'm beginning to think that it might not truly be a channel to revenue. That said, the benefits of selling in at, the upper level of an organization. And when, the VP of applications turns around to their head of engineering and says, hey, we just got pitched or told to evaluate, this new platform that, the CEO met somebody at a trade show or whatever. And now the pitch was good, so we want to evaluate it. To have that developer turn around and say, "Yo, yeah, I've heard of it," or even better, "I've used it and I like it and I know how easy it is." Overcoming that, there's the challenge then of making sure that we've reached into or attempted to reach developers at organizations where our opportunities are, but we continually focus on making sure that we eliminate objections as quickly as we possibly can, because the easiest thing to do with your legacy infrastructure is nothing, and just continue throwing money at the problem and not re-architect it and kick the can down the road. And we wanted to have as many evangelists inside, as many champions as possible, and that has it has worked out, but not as a sales lead. It has worked out as more of a public relations and general acceptance and a progress tool.
Yeah, yeah. How have some of your go-to-market efforts fed back into the product? I mean, you talked a little bit about making developers that are happy and with the product or have heard good things about it certainly helps with some of those, reduce some friction in the sales process. But how have you used some of the go-to-market efforts to feed back into the product, and what customer personas have been most helpful in creating a virtuous feedback loop?
I think, like many products, when you're first starting out and you're dealing with your first set of customers, your product roadmap is entirely customer led. You're right. It's we don't have not even just a cool feature, but literally a feature that delivers parity with their existing solution. So initially, you may have a very cool idea and a very cool story, a very cool value prop. But in order to achieve that, you have to, sort of backwards engineer some of the things that they're already relying on. And a lot of those things are things that are pretty standard in the database industry. We were doing a lot of things that were unique and innovative and performance oriented. And then there are things like, taking snapshot backups. Well, that seems obvious that a database should do that. And obviously most do, or have a tool set, to do it. And we had a way you could do it, but it wasn't as easy as the rest of the experience. If we focus on developer experience, then everything should just be that easy. So as we met with customers and engaged with them, dealing with the engineers was always great because they're very specific into the thing that they're building. The IT staff, though, and the head of applications, right? One wants performance. The head of applications just wants to run everything quickly and with as little cost as possible. And IT wants it to be stable and wants it to have all of the tools for disaster recovery. And so those two personas become the biggest tool set and resource we have to help, steer or at least prioritize all of the things that we want to do, with HarperDB, the platform going forward. But we don't want to ever get hung up, going into an enterprise and they say, do you have the ability to turn off indexing every field if we don't want to? And we didn't,
Right.
because we made the choice to index everything by default because we knew that the long-term performance benefits were there. But there are absolutely use cases where you shouldn't. And we prioritize that because, it's a good choice. It doesn't take away from our simplicity story. It's optional to not index things, but it also delivers value immediately and also shows customers that you're listening to them. And having customers that believe that you care about their outcome, because we do, is one of the strengths of HarperDB as an organization.
Yeah. So if you could go back and do it again, you mentioned a few things that, a few areas where there was some quick success and some things that need a little modifications and stuff. But, if you could go back and do it again, what would you change about the go-to-market strategy?
When I was first hired, I was a customer success engineer, which I was the only one. It meant that I was the power user of the product, and I broke it every day. And I would build demo apps like fleet management systems, asset management, distributed chat engines. I would build all of these things, and we would show them to potential customers, and they would say, "Oh my God, I want that fleet management system. Can you sell me the fleet management system?" And we were like, "No, we're the platform that you build the fleet management system on top of. This is just a demo code," and we couldn't sell it in as a product, even though that's exactly what they wanted. And I'm like, I don't want to spin up 10 other new companies. Like we just
Right.
want to be a platform and a database. So I think presenting these point solutions was shorthand for we didn't have a good demonstration tool. We didn't have a good way to show value without showing it in action. And we got much better. We built, a studio that allows you to visualize not only the data in one database, but how the data flows between instances of HarperDB. So we got much better at the visual representation of what we are and what we do, so that when we were selling in and when we were demoing to people, they got it without it being a specific application. They have the point solution that they want. They just need to know that they can do it on our platform. And we spent a lot of time spinning our wheels, sort of demonstrating, a point solution that you could
Yeah.
do to people who, quite frankly, weren't ready to start a company to run this software. They just wanted to buy some software that somebody else would maintain. And we kind of dug ourselves a little bit of a hole there.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. So moving forward, what drives the product roadmap? How do you prioritize? There's probably plenty of competing priorities, but how do you prioritize between innovations that your team has, but customers may not be anticipating or even asking for, and those things that customers are asking for? How do you find that right balance there?
Well, I think there are a couple legs to that, or there's three legs on that stool. There's what we can build very quickly, what are very, very large, initiatives that are going to take time, and then what will pique the interest of the public at large, people that we're not talking to directly. What can we turn into really cool, differentiating marketing initiatives to sort of get some traction with other marketing initiatives that bring in organic traffic and sort of build our pipeline without, our direct sales team being involved. And so what are those features that are going to make a splash in the market, right? You've watched, a whole season of earnings calls where like every single CEO just said AI over and over and over again
Right.
because
Right, I can imagine.
ultimately they knew that was going to that was going to pump the stock up. And
Yeah.
and so we look constantly for those things that we know are different, but will provide value based on what our customers, are sort of telling us in aggregate. And so I think what drives the product roadmap is having a 30,000 foot view of every customer and their asks and their needs and where we are falling short. And instead of building a band-aid feature to fix one customer's problem, having the wherewithal to be able to quickly architect something that maybe wraps five or six of those things up into a very simple expression of that value. So being able to understand from an engineering perspective how parts might fit together is a true advantage of working at HarperDB. And one of the reasons I'm so happy here is everybody is, or at least was, a developer. We've all written code. We all have the ability to sort of synthesize a bigger, feature or value prop out of lots of little requests because we're all familiar with, the code base. And so I think the prioritization comes from, striking that balance. But obviously, there's always going to be the 800-pound gorilla customer who comes in and says, "I could sell this a million times if you just had this."
Yeah.
And for a startup, yeah, that moves it down the line pretty quickly.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, Jackson, thanks so much for joining the show. I've got one last question before we wrap up here. What's one piece of advice you would have for organizations that might be in a similar boat, may do something completely different, but they've got a complex product and they're struggling with the complexity of it and how to market it? What's one place you'd recommend they start?
Really good user experience is the single most important thing you can do for your product. Have people be able to show up and use your product without reading the directions. Right? There are some IKEA pieces that I can build without even looking at the instructions, and there are others that I cannot. But as a developer who hated writing documentation, I always strive to build something so easy to use that nobody ever asked to see the documentation. Not that we don't have it, because of course we do. We're a responsible company that takes care of our users. But at the end of the day, much like the CEO of Zappos used to say, if somebody calls the 800 number on the site, we've failed, because
Yeah.
it wasn't easy enough for them to solve their own problem. So, a absolute laser focus on, can I do it without looking at a UI? Can it just work? It should just work, right? And every step we put in between a customer and the value prop that we espouse to do so easily, it is a hurdle that we may have to overcome and that I strive to eliminate. Our tagline is simplicity without sacrifice. We want all of that performance, but we don't want it to be as hard as it is right now with existing technologies. And that's why we glued it all together and tried to wrap it up into one package. Simplicity without sacrifice is the driving ethos of HarperDB. And ultimately, I look back on all the startups I've been a part of, and I think, yeah, probably could have leaned into that a little bit more.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for inviting me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here, because talking about marketing when you work for literally one of the most technical platforms in the world isn't something I get to do a lot. And so thank you so much for having me on the show, and I have really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. No, really appreciate your insights, your advice, and really, really glad to have you here. Again, I'd like to thank Jaxon Repp, Field CTO and Head of Marketing at HarperDB, for joining the show. You can learn more about Jaxon and HarperDB by following the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GregKihlstrom.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.